Story 1. I had reserved a small cabin on Airbnb in the early spring, nestled deep in a forest. The property had a cluster of nearly identical cabins scattered across the owner's land. Faint, unmarked trails connected them, probably remnants from when the owner was clearing and moving through the woods during construction. I didn't have any particular agenda for the trip. It was just a short drive from home, and I wanted some quiet time surrounded by nature. On the second day, I slept until late morning, brewed a cup of coffee, and lounged near the fireplace as the sun started dipping toward the horizon. I threw on a jacket and wandered out for a stroll. I followed a narrow path behind the cabin, assuming it would lead to one of the other cabins or eventually loop back, deeper into the forest. I spotted two figures standing a bit off the trail, maybe 50 or 60 yards away. They weren't moving much, just looking down at something on the ground. No gestures, no talking. It looked strange enough that I paused to watch, but soon they were too distant to see clearly. I convinced myself they were likely other guests, exploring, and from this distance, their stance probably looked weirder than it was after a few more minutes. I realized the trail wasn't curving or connecting anywhere, it just plunged straight into the woods, away from any of the other cabins. Coupled with the earlier sighting, it started feeling unnerving. I thought about turning back. Then a sudden, piercing sound erupted from behind me. It wasn't quite human. More like an elk's call, but sharp ran off. I froze. The two men were now on the trail behind me, still yards away, standing completely still and apparently watching me. Whatever the noise had been, it was far too loud to come from them. Imitating an animal, it echoed through the forest unnaturally. I stayed motionless, assessing the situation. Then, as if deciding something, they turned and slipped off the trail, into the trees, disappearing from sight. I lingered a few moments, making sure they were gone, then hurried back to the cabin. I considered messaging the host about the trail and the strangers, but it seemed like an odd question, and I let it go. By the time I settled back near the fireplace, night had fully fallen. I poured a cup of tea and tried to shake off the unease. After about half an hour, that same unnatural scream echoed through the trees again. I peered out the window, but could see only dark silhouettes of trees. The sound chilled me, so I drew the curtains and searched online for anything that could explain it. Local wildlife. Strange calls, but found nothing. Minutes later, I heard heavy footsteps at the front door. Boots thumped against the wood and then paused. My heart raced. A slow, deliberate knock followed. I inched closer to the peephole. Outside were two men, the same ones. I was certain. Their faces were hidden behind cheap, plastic animal masks, and their hoods shadowed the rest of their heads. They mirrored each other perfectly in stance and clothing. I backed away while calling the police. Mid-conversation, a loud thud hit the door. For a moment, I feared they were breaking in, but then their footsteps retreated into the woods. By the time the officer arrived, he found a deep gouge in the door, as if a knife had been pressed into it. He took notes, though I could tell some of my stories sounded implausible. I left that cabin immediately and never returned. Every few months, I check local news for strange incidents in that forest, but nothing ever comes up to this day. I have no idea what the men wanted or why they were there. Story to just last year, I'd gotten a promotion at my job. It wasn't too much extra pay, but part of the new position would have him traveling a ton to different locations all over the States. I was single and really had nothing else going on at the time, so I was really excited to travel. As for where I'd stay, it was always pretty random. Sometimes hotels, sometimes resorts, and every once in a while a small cabin. I'm not sure why they switched it up every time, but I thought it was interesting at the very least, anyway. This week, I was heading to a new town to visit their department of their company, and I was booked for an Airbnb. I'd already had the promotion for months at this point and had gotten fairly used to it, so the excitement of seeing where my next stay was at had kind of died out once the plane landed. I got my rental car and started heading to the address of the Airbnb. I noticed right off the bat, though, it was farther than usual from where the company building was. Usually, if it was an Airbnb, it would be because it was very close to where its site was. But I think this time the drive took minutes, and when I arrived at just about .m, I thought there was a mistake. The place was huge, I mean, at least a square FT with a huge yard and everything. I had to triple-check this was the right place. And it was. I got everything inside, and I have to say, although the outside looked real nice, it definitely didn't look quite as good on the inside. Maybe just a bit old-fashioned for my taste. Still, I couldn't complain. There was a ton of space, way more than I could ever use after the long flight. I was too tired to explore the entire place right away. I just brought up all my stuff to the bedroom, turned off the lights, and got in bed. As I laid there, I noticed how creaky the house was. It felt like it was making a lot of noise. Nothing concerning, but just these creaks and thumps in the walls. I thought it must have been just how big a houses were. I mean, I wouldn't be one to know. I don't think I'd ever been in a house this big, but unfortunately, I'm a pretty light sleeper. So the constant noises kept me up long enough to realize I needed some water. I hadn't even eaten or drank anything since the flight, sort of frustrated that I had to get up, knowing it only make it harder to sleep. I tiredly got out of bed and headed through the long hallway and down the steps to the kitchen. Strangely, once I was downstairs, old creaks and thumps I'd been hearing for the last hour were gone. Like, at some point between me getting up and moving from the bedroom to the downstairs hallway, all the sounds dotted was one of those moments that had me scratching my head. Like, what were the chances of that? Anyway, I grabbed a glass of water, no heaven, bothering to turn on any of the lights, and headed back upstairs. I was able to fall asleep after that, as the rest of that night I didn't hear any more sounds or noises in the morning. I only spent maybe minutes there, waking up late and still tired, but having to rush out of the house to get to work. After being at the office all day, I went out with a couple guys from work to get drinks. So I actually didn't get back to the Airbnb until sometime past TP.m. I headed inside and sat on the sofa relaxing for a minute. I was exhausted. But I remembered I still hadn't yet checked out the rest of the house. It felt almost mandatory, too. At least, give it a look round. So I got up and just casually walked through the rooms. Walking through it, I honestly could think of much use for an elm this large. I even got so curious that I looked it up to see how much it was, finding it was actually priced the same as other much smaller places in Theria, which I found to be a little odd. Also, it looked like some parts of the house weren't reset from the last guest. It looked clean, but some pillows were all over the couch, and some of the chairs and stuff were just in random places. It kind of looked like someone had just been here, and the most strange thing was that one of the kitchen chairs was pulled out. I was in there for a minute earlier that morning and never sat down. And I could have sworn all the chairs were pushed under the table before. Must have just overlooked it, I thought. I pushed it back under the table. After the quick 5-minute tour of the house, I figured it best to take a shower and head to bed for the night. Aussie had another long day tomorrow. It turned off all the lights, went upstairs, showered, and got in bed. I was just on the verge of falling asleep when a familiar sound suddenly came from below me. It was those creaks. They suddenly started again. The fact that I was just about to fall asleep made it 1,000 times more obnoxious. I sat up and listened, and even though I was annoyed, a part of me felt like it didn't sound like your typical house noises, so it made me a little uneasy as well. I started to think I could make out individual footsteps walking round under me, and maybe even cabinets being opened and closed. I couldn't tell if it was just my mind making up things, though. I got up and quietly opened the door. The sounds didn't stop this time. I could clearly hear them from the hallway. I carefully walked down and up to the stairs, which were wooden and kind of creaky. And as soon as I took a step, everything went quiet. My heart started racing. I moved to the bottom of the steps and looked down the hall. I could tell a light in the kitchen was on. I swore I turned off all lights before going to bed. But there was still a small chance I just forget about that light. I quietly walked down the hall and looked in the kitchen. My eyes widened. That chair in the kitchen was pulled out again, like someone had just been sitting there. Only a second after seeing that, I saw something else behind the chair in the far back room, where all the lights were off and it was nearly pitch dark. A figure was peering round that corner watching me. We held eye contact for a moment as I completely froze up before they jolted back behind the corner. A few seconds later, I heard a door slam shut. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I ran up to that corner and flicked on the lights, searching around for a second to see where he went or if he was gone. But I didn't see him. I didn't even see what door he possibly could have gone through that I'd so clearly heard him slam shut. I ran upstairs, got my phone, and sprinted out of the house. I drove away and called the police as far as what was going on in there. I'm afraid that I got very few answers. The host and the police talked for a while, but the host felt like he wasn't taking me seriously or like he thought I was lying. Maybe he just didn't want to be responsible. But in all fairness, I had no proof of anything. I wasn't even able to see what the guy looked like. And the host claimed that there were no doors where I'd supposedly heard the man and slam a door. From everything just felt really weird about the whole situation after the fact. My company was nice enough to just move me to a hotel for the rest of the week. But honestly, I was pretty shook for the rest of that trip. Had I stayed in that house any longer with whoever was in there with me, I'm afraid that things could have gone a lot differently. Story 3. I was seeing a few relatives during a trip I was taking across the country. They lived in a city I was passing through about halfway along my drive, so I thought it'd be nice to see them and spend some time there. I booked an Airbnb in their town. It was just a typical small home in the suburbs. Nothing too fancy or cool. Just a place to stay at for a couple of days. I got there really late. I think it had to be 4 p.m. There was an email from the owner, Jay, that I got earlier with the passcode and everything to get in. While I was getting some stuff out of my car in the driveway, though, I was partly alarmed by a man walking right up behind me. It was Jay, the host. I'd been in the driveway for less than a minute, and I wasn't expecting him or really anyone to be out here this late. He started casually talking to me and offering to help carry some things up to the door and also showed me into the house. I was tired, too much to be confrontational, but I did feel weird he was even here. Usually, I never even met or talked to the other hosts of Elms. I was sure he was just trying to ben us, though. Maybe I was one of his first renters. He gave me a quick tour, even showing Moik to the bedroom before saying good night and walking back downstairs. I started unpacking a bit, but really was waiting for the guy to leave so I can rest for the night. I thought if I went down there while he was still around, then he might strike up another conversion, which I was not in the mood for. After a minute, I never really heard any signs of him leaving, like a door opening or closing behind him. So I went downstairs real quick and just made sure he was gone. Didn't see him anywhere. So I locked up the door, grabbed what was left, and went back to the bedroom. It was late. So, of course, I just unpacked and went to sleep. In the morning, I saw my relatives, but only spent a few hours with them. So I was back at the Airbnb around noon and stayed inside just watching TV until dinner time. I went out to pick up something quick for dinner. But when I pulled into the driveway and headed up to the front door, I noticed it wasn't locked. That was really weird because I don't think I'd ever forgotten something like that, especially not while staying in a foreign town at a rental property. Mimind instantly thought back to the owner, Jay, and how sort of invasive he was when I first met him the night before. This seemed like much more of an overstep, so I hoped it wasn't him, and was actually me just forgetting to lock it. I opened the door and stepped in. Hello, anyone in here? I called out just to be safe. There wasn't a response, and all the lights were still off, so I closed the door behind me and went on with my night. I tossed the food on the table in the living room, turning on the TV and preparing to spend the rest of the night there, when something got my attention. It was a noise in the other side of the house. It sounded like something hitting fall. I turned my head and looked down the hallway toward the sound, but I knew I wouldn't see anything now, even recounting for what happened at that night. I find it odd that for some reason I was very fixated on that single somewhat unprovoking sound in the house. I felt like I had to know what it was all like. It was something I should be cautious about even after just hearing it once. I got up from the couch and walked into a room on the far side of the home, which I think was the family room or maybe just a reading nook. Not sure what it was exactly, but it was a very small room in the back of the house with a sofa and a nightstand. But just a sofa and nightstand. No windows, no decorations, no TV. It was very plain and empty, which made it feel kind of off-putting. I flicked on the light and just sort of looked at the room, getting that off feeling about it before noticing something else stood behind the couch coming just up above at the top. There was a crease in the wall. I looked a bit closer, eventually moving the whole couch over to the side. It was a door, not a regular-sized one, but like a small, maybe a 50 hatch door. Had I not heard anything and been looking round so intently, I never would have noticed it, especially not behind the couch. I felt uneasy as I reluctantly tried to open it, but it was locked. There wasn't a lock on the outside, so it had to be locked from the inside, which made no sense at all. Something in me felt like there was something really disturbing behind that door, and I would not be able to stay here and feel safe unless I knew what it was. I couldn't just break down the door, though. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the Airbnb, Jay's number. My thought was that if he acted word about telling me what's back there, or if he tried to come over, or if I just got a bad vibe, then I'd leave right away. I walked up to the front window and looked outside as I called Jay's number. It was dark, but I wanted to be prepared if he just suddenly showed up at the house like he did on the first night. The phone rang through, so I dialed again. I tried over and over for a few minutes, eventually giving up. Honestly, I didn't know what to do. It was hard to know if I was overthinking this or if this was something where I should actually just trust my gut and pack up and leave. I walked back down to the small room and stared at the door for a minute as I stood there thinking. I just pressed on the door again, not really trying to do anything, but this time it creaked open. It wasn't locked anymore. I nervously stuck my head through the gap in the wall. The only light was hotbled through the doorway from the room, but I could see a dark staircase going down into some sort of unfinished establishment with old sketchy wooden steps. I couldn't even see the bottom. It was too dark. However, I could see the lock in the back of the door. It was one of those bolt locks that you slide back and forth, meaning it was manual. Someone had to have just been behind this door and physically unlocked it. My face went pale. I backed away from the wall. I was so horrified I couldn't even think for a moment. Was someone inside the house with me? It felt like my whole body was shaking. As I started to creep down the hallway, most of my stuff was still upstairs in the bedroom. It wasn't much, just 2 suitcases. I could probably have them packed and get out of there in minutes. Not my best move, but that's what I decided to do. I got upstairs and started throwing everything into these suitcases. The paranoia of someone possibly being in the house with me had me glancing at the doorway to the room constantly. Afraid someone might appear there any second, I was just able to stuff the last suitcase when I heard a creak from there outside the room. When I got up and looked out, nobody was there. It was really hard to hold myself together, but I knew I had to get out immediately. I picked up both suitcases and started hurrying toward the stairs, half expecting one of the doors in the hall to swing open suddenly. But I got down to the front door, running out, and with both hands full. I didn't even bother closing it. But not 3 seconds after I left, before I even reached the car, the front door slammed shut behind me. That only confirmed my worst fear. I got in my car and got the hell away from that place later. Once I got to a hotel, I tried calling Jay again, as well as texting him. He never answered or responded, personally. I think Jay had a hidden basement below the house that he was staying in.